In Nice, France, 84 people killed by a terrorist truck driver. French officials saying 10 of the dead, 10 of them were young children.
This is the 13th one this year. And since this first started with Nice in 2015, we're up 300% in terms of the lethality.
Breaking news coming in from Paris. A terror attack in one of the most famous tourist spots in the world. Gunshots ringing out on the Champs-Elysees.
Security forces rushed to the scene. As they position themselves with guns pointed upward, terrorists have stormed the building.
Is a 39-year-old from Uzbekistan who previously posted jihadist propaganda online.
ISIS is an initialism for an extremist terrorist organization known as the Islamic State. During their height in 2015, ISIS controlled significant portions of Syria and Iraq. 3 years later, in 2018, their control had dwindled to a few strongholds located in Syria. But where did ISIS come from? The answer is complicated, but the origins of ISIS can be traced back to the 1700s to a man named Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. Wahhab believed that Islam had been contaminated by shirk, which means to associate physical objects with Allah. Since Wahhabism decries many of the traditions of Islam, such as the celebration of Muhammad's birthday and large portions of the Shiite traditions, Wahhabism was largely unpopular and offended many practicing Muslims at the time. This splinter group would likely have gained little ground in the Muslim community if it wasn't for Wahhab's connection to the Ibn Saud clan. The clan agreed to propagate Wahhab's teachings to the various sections of Arabia they had controlled, and this was likely for spiritual support from Wahhab. A century and a half later, the Ibn Saud clan eventually consolidated the Saudi Arabian peninsula under the rule of Abdul Aziz ibn Saud during the early 20th century. This consolidation brought with it the mandatory practice of Wahhabism to the entire peninsula. Those who refused to conform to the religion were considered not true Muslims and were executed. This method of purifying is darkly reminiscent of the Qajarite methods of capital punishment. To this day, the Saudi Arabian peninsula is still governed by the Wahhabi principles, though some standards have been relaxed. During this time, an extremist ideology was being developed known as Qutbism. Qutbism is largely considered to be the motivating ideology of many radical terrorist groups and people, most notably Osama bin Laden. Qutbism, much like Wahhabism, aimed to restore Islam to its pure state, or so they claim. Developed by a man by the name of Sayyid Qutb, this ideology laid a consistent framework for modern terrorism. He wrote a book titled Milestones that called for, among other things, the avoidance of Western ideals, jihad against the godless, and stressed the importance of jihad offensively to destroy the godless from the face of the earth. Taking a step back, we can see two clear forks in the history of Islam. Wahhabism and Qutbism both called for a purification of Islam from what each representative teacher believed to be a contaminant. For Wahhabism, the source was internal, focusing on other Muslims and their idolatrous practices as the source of this contamination. Wahhabism also highlighted the study of Islamic law, known as jurisprudence. Qutbism, on the other hand, took the tenets of Wahhabism a step further and looked to both internal and external entities as something to cleanse. Qutbism asserted moral superiority, called for the purging of non-Islamic countries, and generally expressed the importance of cleansing the world of all non-Islamic believers. Qutbism is generally seen as the precursor to Salafist jihadism, which is the primary source of Islamic terrorism today. Qutbism is the core ideology that enables Salafi jihadists to commit acts of terrorism. Two major separations from mainstream Islam were required to create the ideologies that Salafi jihadists used to morally justify their terrorism. From a historical perspective, both extremist groups appear to have proliferated due to military might and not religious accuracy. After analyzing hundreds of case studies of Islamic terrorists, MI5 concluded that, quote, there is evidence that a well-established religious identity protects against violent radicalization. They also discovered that, quote, many lack the religious literacy and could actually be regarded as religious novices. Very few have been brought up in strongly religious households, and there is a higher than average proportion of converts. This disproportionate amount of converts to ISIS is evidence of how different Salafi jihadism is from mainstream Islam. Only 15% of fighters in some ISIS groups reported joining based on their own personal religious beliefs. However, 87% gave religion as a reason why they joined. This is the crux of the conflation of Islam and modern terrorism. This statistic is extremely difficult to understand without first understanding the difference in religious beliefs and religion. The first implies a previously held belief motivated them to join the group. The second implies that religion was used to justify joining the group. The difference is subtle, but it indicates that most terrorists weren't looking for a group to express their beliefs, but rather that they were hunting for an excuse to become radicalized. This subtlety is often very difficult to spot, but it is strong evidence that points to the fact that Islam is not primarily to blame for violent terrorism, but rather that ISIS members are pulled in through some other means. So, is modern terrorism and violence a direct result of Islam? It doesn't seem to be. Rather, something else is driving people to allow themselves to become radicalized.